Taking a step back, we can look at the skeletal anatomy, not just the cranial anatomy, between humans and great apes. We'll look at this in much more detail in 2 weeks when we talk about the origin of hominids and its association with bipedality. But as a starting point, we can again note that humans have essentially the same bones in the same positions that all of the great apes do. What differs is the proportion, size, and shape. One way of understanding these differences is by thinking about the differences in generalizations and specialties that we see between humans and great apes, particularly in how we move around and how we engage with the world around us. Humans are bipeds, meaning that we walk on 2 feet, and we are specialized to do this. As adults, there aren't many other forms of locomotion that we can do really at all. Great apes, in contrast, tend to be very generalized locomotors. We think of them and describe them most commonly as knuckle walkers, meaning they're walking simultaneously on all 4 appendages and on their hands walking on their knuckles, something that we'll talk about again in 2 weeks, and that, if you're lucky, perhaps I'll actually demonstrate for you, although very poorly because I'm a specialized biped. But these differences in locomotor patterns are reflected from the neck down in just about every aspect of our skeletal anatomy. In humans, again, we're specialized bipeds. We walk on 2 feet. That also means that our arms and our hands are actually free. So our arms and our hands are actually, in some ways, more generalized than those of the apes. Most of the times, our arms aren't doing any specific required function, such as locomotion, which means our arms and the skeletal anatomy of our arms have been free to do different things. So while we're specialized bipeds, our upper limb reflects some degree of generalization, the fact that we can use our hands and our arms for a variety of different activities. This is one of the differences, one of the different areas that we see between humans and the great apes. And this is reflected in the hands, the wrist, the upper and lower bones of the arm, and also the morphology of the shoulder in general. We can see it in part in the scapula, the shoulder blade bone right here, and its position on the back of our skeleton. Again, with the quadrupeds, with the great apes, they're using their forelimbs in locomotion, which means that shoulder blade is an important part of that locomotion, and it tends to sit more laterally on the trunk of the skeleton. In humans, it tends to be more posteriorly positioned and associated with stability in our shoulder region. There are a number of other anatomical differences that we can notice across the skeleton. The biggest area of difference between humans and the great apes is in the pelvis region, the hips. Again, our pelvis reflects the fact that we're a biped. The fact that at some point during our evolutionary past, we went from a different habitual posture, probably one that was more bent, not quite so upright, to the very upright posture we have today. Our pelvis not only supports the muscular architecture that allows us to be bipeds, something again we'll talk about more in 2 weeks' time, it also supports our upper body. Part of that support of the upper body is transmitted through the spine. Humans have this round, broad pelvis, but they also have a spine that has characteristic curvature to help support the weight of our upper body and the weight of our expanded brain. So in our spine, we have a characteristic lordotic curve in the lower or lumbar region of the spine. This is a backwards facing arch, basically. And then in the middle of the spine, we have what's a characteristic kyphotic curve. This is a forward facing arch that creates this spring-like structure to our spine in general. And again, we have a little bit more of a lordotic curve actually at the top in the cervical vertebra, or the most superior aspect of our spine as well. Now we can contrast these morphologies with what we observe in the great apes. Great apes, recall, are much more generalized locomotors. They walk quadrupedally, but they're also capable of a whole range of motions, including climbing, including some bipedal locomotion. Part of what enables this generalized locomotion in the great apes, and indeed across all primates, is a very flat, elongated pelvis. This gives them a structure that differs dramatically from humans in terms of the relative position of their upper body to their lower body, how muscles then act to actually locomote these forms of their body, how their upper limbs are engaged in these activities, and creates a lot of structural differences across the skeleton, even though the overall set of bones, their relationship to each other, are all basically the same. In the exercises this week, you'll have a lot of opportunity to look at human and great ape skeletal anatomy, to understand the basic differences between them, as well as identifying specific features that will become important as we move forward and begin examining the fossil record. Hopefully these exercises will help you appreciate the differences between primates, especially the great apes, and humans, from both an evolutionary but also simply from a comparative anatomy standpoint.